Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here with George Yowell, and I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. It's September 2nd, 2010, and we are in the former Bell South building. Is it the AT&T building now?
Yes.
And I'm here to talk to you about VE. But I'm going to start with, where did you grow up?
In Gordonsville, Virginia.
And did you spend your whole childhood there?
I did, yeah.
What did your parents do?
My father ran a grocery store up until the end of World War II, and then got frustrated with the stamps and the federal government's involvement, and sold that right after the war, and then he built a building and opened a white goods store because everybody was remodeling kitchens after the war, and ran that until probably the late 60s, and he retired.
What was the grocery store's name? Can you remember?
It was just, I think it was Yowell's Market or something like that. But when he sold it, I remember the name then because I was older. But it was H&W, and it was two guys that bought it. But right now, there is a 5-star restaurant in that grocery store in a little town of about 2,000 people. Oh, probably less than 2,000 people.
What's the name of the restaurant?
It's been written up in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the newspapers, and just kind of funny to go in there and see where the drink machine was that I sat on, which is now part of a 5-star restaurant.
What is your educational background?
High school at Orange County High School, and Virginia Tech undergraduate, and then graduate school work at the University of Richmond. Finished my master's in business.
When did you start first thinking about the environment and its well-being?
I guess I was active in scouting and active in a lot of organizations where you were in nature and respected it and loved to hunt and fish, and so I guess I've always had that. But one of the things that went back to when we moved the bank into the James Center, and we wanted to get pictures and decorate it properly. And I don't know, the idea hit me of saying every picture we have has got to have water in it, because, and this may have happened. Let's see, I'm trying to put the time frame, whether the Virginia Environment Endowment got started in 77.
77, yes.
And we moved into that building and probably after that. But
I think it was in the middle 80s.
That'd be about right, yeah.
85. I have an article.
Yeah. And so every picture we bought were local artists that had water in it. And we got a lot of publicity on that, several articles in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and the news leader at that time was still going. And then I get this phone call. Judge Murridge and I had known each other well and were friends. And he banked with us. And he called me one day and he said, Georgia, if I were to send you a check for $8 million, what would you do with it? And I said, Judge, I'd put it in a checking account and I'd watch it really closely for you. And he said, yeah, I know you, with no interest, just a checking account. And he said, come on down here, I need to talk to you. And he had this idea because he got all the tough cases. I mean, if you look back in history, you got the school busing case, he had the Strong's Thurman's brothers case, he had the Sioux Indian uprising case, he had the Westinghouse uranium case, and he had, this case was Allied Chemical. And
he had Dunk on Shield, too.
That's right, he had that. And but he enjoyed controversy. I mean, he didn't duck controversy. But just a great guy. And he said, when I got in there, he had thought through it, and he said, look, tomorrow is the day he was going to make his ruling, which was the next day. He said, I'm going to fine him $13 million, which was the largest corporate fine ever assessed in this country at that time. And I mean, remember, you're back in the early 70s, or mid 70s. And he said, then we got to talking about the fact that if they could do something, he said, I don't want that money just to go to the federal treasury and sit there. It ought to be doing something for Virginia. And that certainly appealed to me. And so we sat there and worked with it. And we met the next morning with the executive vice president of Allied and kind of laid out a plan that if they would make a commitment to put $8 million into an endowment to improve Virginia's environment, that he would reduce the fine to $5 million. Now that's still $13 million, but the donation was tax deductible, whereas the fine is not tax deductible. So it was a $4 million windfall for Allied, and so they jumped at the opportunity, and that's really how we got started with it. And then I think he talked to Francis and Sidney Lewis, and he had Judge McKenzie and Admiral Bullock, and he had Bill Cummings, because he was the prosecuting attorney, and then he had a lady who was her husband. She was a lot younger than her husband, but he was on the Supreme Court, and they were just a great group of directors, which were fun to work with. And the judge insisted that this not be a job, we had work to do, and he had expectations for us, but we ought to have fun doing it. And so that's pretty much, that's a sort of early history.
So you talked about Judge Marriage appointing you, but how did you feel about the appointment? Did you feel honored, or?
I felt honored, that he'd asked me to do that.
Had you heard about the Keystone?
Oh yeah, it was big. It was in all the papers. I mean, it was a lot of coverage on it, not just local but national coverage.
And at that point, you were one of the youngest board members, weren't you? You were in your mid-30s, maybe?
77. I would have been 35. Right, 41. I would have been 36. Yeah.
The Lewises were probably in their 60s, maybe.
Yeah.
So, you probably were one of the youngest board members. I don't know how old Bill Cummings was.
Bill and I were close, I think, in age, and I think we had children similar ages. And I can't think, who's the lady I'm trying to think of? Who's Douglas was her husband's name. That's long before you all's time.
I can't place it, I'm sorry. I don't think we've interviewed her.
Yeah.
So you were the treasurer of the endowment.
Right.
And so what was after you said you'd put in a checking account $8 million and watch it, what was your strategy to maintain the endowment, yet, create this giving, this granting institution that would help the environment? What was the strategy?
Well, we had several of us worked on that, but we had a plan that we thought that our expenses should not be more than 1% of the endowment, and that we wanted at least a 5 to 6% return on it, so that the money was earning money. And then we interviewed several investment banking firms. Wheat was one, and we split the funds. I know Wheat was one of them, but the other one.
Thomas Siegel and Long.
That's right. And So they shared the funds, and we could play off of what they were doing as to what was working better. And the finance committee was active. And there were good thinkers on it, with the chairman, with the exception of the chairman, of course. But that's basically how we started, with those goals, to make sure that the funds were there, and it was for the long term.
So is that a feasible 1% to keep operational funds at 1%? Was that a feasible?
It was probably a little tight, but it worked. We stayed close to that.
So in retrospect, would you approach the endowment in the same way as you did then?
I think so. We may be a little more. I mean, at that time, the markets were all doing well, and we didn't have a cloud at that time over the market. We had come through a period in '74 where there had been, with the real estate market, had done something not as big as we've had recently, but it was at that time it was a downturn. And but yeah, I think we'd be pretty much the same.
There was there's another woman she's doing the processing of the records, so she can look back at all these things. And she said that in a board meeting in 1979, you cautioned the record of managed investments should be evaluated on a long-term basis. And I spoke with Dixon Butler, who came on after you were on the board, and he felt like maybe that Wheat and Thompson and Siegel and Walmsley didn't, I can't remember the exact mechanics of it, but that they didn't, it wasn't managed as well as it could have. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I left Richmond in '88, and I felt like that Wheat and the other firm had managed it well.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any Jerry McCarthy stories that you can share with us?
That I can tell?
For the record?
Let me think. Yeah, there are several Jerry stories, but Jerry was always very serious, and the rest of us, Jerry has a sense of humor, has a great sense of humor, but it was fun to pull his leg occasionally, and he was a great sport about it. But let me see if I can think of one. I don't know, I guess we were always doing something to
make it fun.
To make it fun.
Any reminiscences about the other board members or Judge Marriage that you want to share?
Admiral Bullock and Judge McKenzie's wife, their wives, loved to share meals, and we had some great meals. I mean, that was one of the things about it. The judge suggested we go to New York once a year, and no matter where we were, somebody's home or at a restaurant, and we had name tags. I also like to share meals, and the two wives would make sure I was sitting in between them. And so we had the whole variety of the meal when after. But that was a story that I caught a hard time about. But I always say, I can't believe they changed the names. I wouldn't change it back for anything. But it was just a lot of fun stories. We were in a hotel in New York, and it was raining, and there was a long line to catch a cab, and we were standing there, and I forget who it was, but he was with Depco, and they always had limousines, and we had Judge McKenzie and a couple of older folks that we were a little worried about their standing and getting there. And they came by, and I said something to one of them. I said, you know, are you getting out of your limousine? When you gonna use it? And he said, no, we're fine. You need it? And I said, well, it'd be great to take these folks to the restaurant. And then they came by, and we had the Lepco limousine take us to lunch, take us to dinner. And but you know, just a lot of stories like that down at the. Let's see. We went to the beach a couple of times at Virginia Beach. Yeah, and the Lewises had a place there that was. They had a lot of stuff, but they had a mannequin. It wasn't a mannequin, but it was a work of art. And he had that. He put it in different places just to shock people. He put it in his home at the front, you know, at the front door, and he put it out at the beach. It was right on. The house was right on the beach. Have you heard this story? And he had this lady who was not dressed, but it was. I mean, not real. It was just a work of art, and I mean, he had people up on the beach coming up to look, and just something like that, you know, was going on a lot with this group when we weren't in meetings. I mean, it was serious, but I think that we even had. I got a phone call from a clerk of a federal judge in Ohio who had heard the FMC case where FMC had contaminated the Ohio River. And I guess he heard about the federal judge. They had heard what Judge Murray had done, and he called me. The clerk called me, and he said, "You know, the judge has asked me to get some information on the Virginia Environmental Endowment." And I said, "Okay." And I told him some of the history, and he said, "Well, if we were to send you, I think it was $1.5 million. It wasn't as big a case as the one Judge Marriage had. And what would you do with it?" And I said, "Well, we manage it, and I'd suggest to you that you'd ask us to take the proceeds from it." I told him at 1%, and then what we tried to do to maintain it. And I said we'd put in a separate fund and do that and give you a report once a year. He said, we weren't thinking about a report or anything like that. And I said, well, you ought to have it just to cover yourself for sending it to a Virginia company from an Ohio. And they did. They sent it to us, and we kept it. Jerry did a great job of keeping them informed. And they would send us. We put a request from that area, and the people who were asking us to fund projects knew that it had to be, knew what our guidelines were. It had to be about the environment. And there were several other cases, I think, after I left in Virginia. One was the meat processor in Smithfield, that's right. And Judge Marriage offered them that opportunity, and they were so mad. I mean, they just were mad about it. I don't know all the details of that case, but they refused to do it, even to get the tax deduction. And I don't know all the details of that, what happened there, but it was interesting that they decided not to do that.
So I'm guessing, I was going to ask you what you liked most about the board meetings, and I'm thinking maybe the food.
Well, the thing that I liked about the board meetings was the request, the grants, and then, going to see them. I mean, in Chesapeake Bay, we had some fun experiences with that group and funded them. And then the mediation school at the University of Virginia was something that I thought was great. That if you can keep it out of the court and mediate and settle it, it does everybody. Everybody comes out better.
I think that's the interesting concept of VE, that it tries to work with the
That's right.
business world. It doesn't work against it. It tries to get them to do the right thing.
That was one thing I think we all agreed on that early on, That we didn't want to be a, we wanted to be an advocate for environmental health and environmental, protecting the environment, but we didn't want to be confrontational.
Because they talk about how you didn't want to support, the board originally agreed not to support lawsuits, I guess, against companies.
That's right. We didn't do that. We didn't fund any of that, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
Up through '88.
So, my next question was, of the grants BE made during your tenure, are there any that are you're particularly fond of? You said the Chesapeake Bay one was.
Yeah, the Chesapeake Bay one, the
UVA.
grant to UVA to start that school of mediation, I think was one. I'm sure there were some others. If I could have gotten that file there, I'd probably have remembered them. But that was some projects we just did too with children to increase their awareness of the importance of the environment that I thought were great.
So what do you think is Jerry McCarthy's and BEE's greatest contribution to the environment of Virginia and the other states the endowment serves?
I think Jerry was we interviewed several folks in '77. He assessed the fine of $13 million. I'd be wrong with that, but don't hold me to this. I think it was October of '76. But he told him he was going to review it in 120 days, which got it close to February. And then he did that, and they agreed to the deal of $5 million fine and $8 million contribution to set up the Virginia Environmental Endowment. And we'd been talking to him during that process, Judge Murridge had, and occasionally I'd meet with the executive vice president that was in charge of this case for Allied. And so by the time the 120 days were up, everybody was pretty much on board as to what was going to happen. But Judge Murridge, we did get it. We did have some differences. He wanted to put, John Warner had just married Elizabeth Taylor, and he wanted to put Elizabeth Taylor on the board. I said, Judge, you're showboating. We're not doing that. And he said, what do you mean? I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And so then he came back and he wanted to put Lady Bird Johnson on there. And I said, yeah, she's got a lot of Virginia connections. And so he didn't do that. But who was it? He had fun with the board. He'd never go with us to a dinner or anything where, he was very straight and didn't want anybody to ever have a chance to come back and say, well, wait a minute, you're participating in this. But I think maybe once he went with us. He probably paid his own ticket, but he and Cheryl went with us, I think, maybe one time in Richmond to do it.
So you decided to leave the board when you got your job in the Dominion of Middle Tennessee. Is that so you couldn't serve when you were in Tennessee?
Well, I could have, I guess, but I didn't think I was right. I thought that, I stayed on for, I think it was less than a year probably, but I just thought that, it's better to have Virginians on that board. Not that I'm not a Virginian, but
people actually connect more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any memories that you want to share that I haven't asked you about?
I'm sure I'll think of them afterwards, but
well, what about, from my understanding, there was some discussion after marriage had gotten Allied to agree to give the money to the endowment, but that the state still thought that it was going to get the money and that it was going to just clean up the river and then take the rest. And there was a concern that,
I think that never was a major concern. Because, I mean, we had said all along we were putting a foundation, and it'd be a 501c3, and we'd have other people contribute, and there'd be other cases, and that's the way it worked out. And it was separate. I mean, not that we didn't cooperate with the state, but it was not one that we thought this would be a state. That's to my memory. Bill would probably have a better feel for that because he was more involved with it from the prosecuting side of it.
had you met Judge Marriage through, because Judge Marriage went to U of R, didn't he?
He did.
So had you met
He taught at U of R too.
Had you met through the U of R connections? Or?
Met primarily through the bank. We had a couple of mutual friends and got together and both liked to joke around a little bit and you know, we'd go to lunch together occasionally. But he was a very good customer of the bank and very much a supporter of the bank in Richmond.
Had you met the Lewises before?
Oh yeah, I knew them well. Yeah, everybody knew the Lewises. I had not known Admiral Bullock and his wife, nor I had heard of Judge McKenzie, but didn't know them on a personal basis. But it's got to be. I'll be kicking myself when I think of a good story.
We always get the best stories when we turn off the recorder. People think of everything.
It's I'll have to think about it.
No, you don't. I mean,
yeah.
We can take a break and we can come back and see if anything pops into your head.
Okay, you want to just kind of look around?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.